Whenever a piece of legislation gets held up or defeated in America's Congress, you'll often hear the cry go up, it's the lobbyists that are to blame. And it's certainly true that there are some powerful interest groups in Washington, DC, including the National Rifle Association, who can exert a lot of influence over members of Congress, even over the White House, regardless of the stated wishes of the public, for instance. But our next guest says that depending on your perspective, lobbying can also be a power for democratic good. Professor Burdett Loomis is a political scientist based at Kansas University and a Fulbright chair at Flinders University. He's an expert in the history and influence of lobbyists. I spoke to him in Sydney. Burdett Loomis, welcome to Planet America.
Thanks very much.
So give us a sense. We hear a lot about the K Street lobbyists in Washington, D.C. from time to time, but just how much influence do they have over the political process in America?
I think the conception is that they have tremendous influence. I think on individual instances you can see where tax lobbyists or lobbyists for universities have gotten particular projects or particular pieces of tax legislation. On the other hand, if you pull back, go to 30,000 feet and look at all the lobbyists, and there are at least 25,000, 30,000 of them in Washington, it's a far more mixed message. Everybody can't win. And so a lot of lobbying is really to protect what's already been gotten. And in the end, the idea that influence is so easily accomplished, I think is at best only partially right and often just plain wrong.
So let's look at the lobbyists and the agendas that are credited with having a huge amount of influence. We often hear about Grover Norquist and Americans for Tax Reform holding the Republican Party to ransom with their no taxes pledge, even though there's been a sort of a bit of a breaking of the solidarity on that. Would you say that that's an example of really successful lobbying?
Yeah, and it almost goes beyond lobbying. It goes back to the electorate. They say, you know, we're going to punish you electorally if you don't vote the right way. And there's this great threat. And it depends upon the Republican electorate, which if for primary election, our pre-selection, we have a primary election and the far right turns out in disproportionate numbers. So someone like Norquist can make those threats and carry through with them, even though all he has to do really is label someone as problematic. I think it is breaking down a little bit now, particularly in the U.S. Senate. And Norquist, I think, is seen as really problematic for a fair number of quite conservative but not crazy Republicans.
So it was a bit of a leap of faith for some Conservatives to break the pledge and to support tax increases at the start of the year. But on guns, it seems they've been holding the Conservative line. How much of that is about the power of the National Rifle Association as a lobby?
Tremendous amount, but I think that, again, we go back to electoral politics. Wayne LaPierre, the chief lobbyist for the NRA, is almost a cartoon character in terms of the way he presents himself. But what he does is represent 3 million folks and probably considerably more votes, again, on the right side of the Republican Party. And they can help Republicans sort through the candidates, and one of the things they do is grade legislators. And the NRA has proven quite powerful in terms of targeting a particular legislator. But that's not so much lobbying. That is the power, I think the legitimate power, I think it's misguided, but the legitimate power of an interest to rally its supporters who feel very strongly about something and bring that into the national arena. I mean, I disagree with the NRA quite strongly, but you have to admire them for taking this particular perspective and making it politically potent.
Where do you draw the line? If to a point lobbying is legitimate, a part of the democratic process, it's free speech, etc., etc., at what point does it get into Jack Abramoff territory or undue influence over the process where ordinary voters are really not being heard in the same way as rich lobbyists?
You're really asking two questions. The Jack Abramoff question, the poster boy for a corrupt relationship with the Republican leadership in the House. And certainly that's over the line. He was convicted. Several legislators were convicted. So that's criminal activity. Undue influence, it gets to be, I think, much more in the eye of the beholder. Because as you point out, lobbying in the United States is constitutionally protected, not just speech, but assembly and petition, core First Amendment rights. So we're not likely to regulate it all that harshly. At the same time, with all the money in politics and lobbying, and you're really talking $7, $8, $9 billion a year, to think that money is not significant in building up huge public relations campaigns, things of that affecting the way Americans think about politics, not just going in and knocking on the door of a congressman. That weight is truly substantial, and I don't think as a country we have a hold on that. So I think one person might see undue influence easily, just lots of money, okay, there's influence. Other folks would say, let's try to disentangle it at least a bit. But if you have a Supreme Court that essentially says money is speech, very hard to keep big money and undue influence out of the game.
When Barack Obama ran for president a little over 4 years ago, he said that lobbyists would not have an open door to his White House. He was going to limit their access, limit their influence. How successful has he been?
I thought that was a very naive and almost stupid thing to say, because many of the people you might want in your cabinet may have been a lobbyist at one time, very talented people. And indeed, he has had to make any number of exceptions. That said, people who have lobbying ties have not served now on a whole variety of advisory committees within the federal government. So I do think that he's made pretty much good on his promise. I think that it's problematic, though. In a sense, he was stigmatizing all lobbyists, and I would say most of them do an honest job representing interests that they believe in to the best of their ability, providing information that the government often needs. And I think that's crucial. You go back to Australia. I think that sometimes the government may well keep lobbyists at arm's length, when in fact those lobbyists, for whatever interest, may well have information that would help make policies somewhat better.
So finally, what are the lessons in for instance, the debate over gun control? Do the victims of gun violence, those who would like to see further restrictions, background checks, limits on certain categories of firearms, should they just get better at lobbying?
Absolutely, and I think we can see that kind of occurring in the 54 votes that did support the changes in the gun laws, not 60 to overcome a potential filibuster. But in looking at some post of that vote polling, you see a supporter of that law doing better, an opponent doing considerably worse. So I think there are political ramifications, and I do think that this is one instance where Obama is almost going to be lobbyist in chief and try to build this coalition. And again, I think that that's the system in a democracy. You lose, you go back, you organize, and there are strong arguments for greater gun control. I think some of those eventually will come to fruition.
Burdett Loomis, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for joining us.
My great pleasure.